Herbert Bayard Swope Sr. was a U.S. editor, journalist and intimate of the Algonquin Round Table. Swope spent most of his career at the New York World newspaper. He was the first and three-time recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for reporting. Swope was called the greatest reporter of his time by Lord Northcliffe of the London Daily Mail. Background: Herbert Bayard Swope was born January 5, 1882 in St. Louis, Missouri, to German immigrants Ida Cohn and Isaac Swope, a watch case maker. He was the youngest of four children, the younger brother of businessman and General Electric President Herbert Swope. As a child, Swope was a loner. Career: Swope was the first recipient of the Pulitzer Prize for reporting in 1917 for a series of articles that year entitled "Inside the German Empire." The articles formed the basis for a book released in 1917 entitled "Inside the German Empire," in the third year of the war, which he wrote with James W. Gerard. He is known for saying, "I can't give you a surefire formula for success, but I can give you a formula for failure. Try to please everybody all the time." He is also credited with coining the phrase Cold War. He was the first newspaper man to employ the op-ed concept of opinion pieces printed opposite the editorial page. Although standard editorial pages have been printed by newspapers for many centuries, Swope established the first modern op-ed page in 1921. When he took over as editor in 1920, he realized that the page opposite the editorials was a catch-all for book reviews, society boilerplate, and obituaries. Quote, he wrote, "It occurred to me that nothing is more interesting than opinion when opinion is interesting. So I devised a method of cleaning off the page opposite the editorial, which became the most important in America. And thereon I decided to print opinions, ignoring facts." Swope served as the editor for New York World's 21-day crusade against the Ku Klux Klan in October 1921, which won the newspaper the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 1922. As an example of investigative journalism, it was ranked 81st of the top 100 journalism stories of the 20th century by New York University's journalism department. He was a legendary poker player, at one point winning over $470,000 in a game with an oil baron, a steel magnate, and an entertainer. Swope was also a member of a social club, the precursor to the Algonquin Round Table, known as the Thanatopsis Inside Straight and Pleasure Club. He was inducted into the Croquet Hall of Fame of the United States Croquet Association in 1979, and his son Herbert Bayard Swope, Jr. in 1981. Mansion: Swope died in 1958 at his home, known as Land's End, on Hofstow Lane at Prospect Point, Sands Point, New York. Swope had hosted parties with the Duke and Duchesses of Windsor, Vivian Leigh and Laurence Olivier, Dorothy Parker, Harpo Marx, Winston Churchill, Averell Harriman, Albert Einstein, Alexander Woollcott, as well as F. Scott Fitzgerald. These associations, along with other similarities to the houses and events in The Great Gatsby, helped give rise to unsubstantiated reports that Fitzgerald had modeled Daisy Buchanan's home in the 1925 novel after Swope's home. However, Swope did not buy Land's End until late 1928. The more likely explanation that ties Swope to Fitzgerald is the time period of 1922 to 24, when Fitzgerald was living in Great Neck, L.I. Prior to buying the Sands Point mansion, Swope had been renting a home since 1919 on East Shore Road in Great Neck, overlooking Manhasset Bay. This home was directly north of 325 East Shore Road. The residents of of sports writer Ring Lardner. Lardner and Fitzgerald were good friends, and spent many an evening sitting out watching the continuous party that was Swope's home during these years. This was the period of time that Fitzgerald was developing his Gatsby concept. David O. Selznick and Jock Whitney met at the home many times throughout the 20s and 30s and held meetings at the mansion that secured funding for Gone with the Wind. Other reports suggest the home, built in 1902, had been designed by Stanford White, though most sources dispute the claim. The clapboard colonial mansion included 15 bedrooms and 14 baths, a 7-car garage, a tennis court with a tennis pavilion, a rose garden and a guest house, on 13.35 acres. The 20,000-square-foot waterfront mansion had originally been built for clothing merchant John S. Browning Sr. in 1911 and originally named Kids Rocks. It was purchased in 1921 by Malcolm D. Sloan, whose wife renamed the estate Key Way Dan. The house had been a site for a Vanity Fair photo shoot with Madonna and had been a location for the 1978 shooting of The Greek Tycoon, a film on the life of Aristotle Onassis. Keith Richards' family lived there for a time in the early 1980s. Charles Shipman Payson and his wife Virginia Kraft purchased the house in the 1980s. In 2005 she sold the house to developer Bert Brodsky of Port Washington for $17.5 million. They misrepresented themselves. Payson told The Observer, "I would not show it to any developer." He said that his life's ambition was to live in that manner, but it was very clear at the closing that they had no intention of living in it. "They are the most awful people I have ever heard of, and that includes terrorists and dictators. They have taken a work of art and permitted it to be totally decimated. It was in pristine condition when I left." Payson said. "He let it fall apart. He stripped everything out that he could sell, which is sacrilegious. I went by the house perhaps 2 years after we sold it, and that's when I realized how he was going to get around the town's objections. Broken windows, storming in, it's sinful." Quote, in 2011, the home was razed after and the property is to be subdivided.